welcome. We're so glad that you could join us for this Community Drug Forum. I'm Sheriff Matt Bostrom, and one of the things that we've done, this will be our second time that we've offered this in the county. 3 weeks ago, we were at North St. Paul High School and had a similar meeting. And the reason that we're coming together is this goes back for me several years. I've had folks from across the county say, Sheriff, you know, where can we get information related to what's going on with drug use in our kids? What can we do as a community? What can we do as parents? And being in law enforcement, it presents us with a challenge because we really have one kind of narrow lane of this. I mean, we respond and our intervention ends up somebody being involved in criminal justice. And so my thinking was, I'm not an expert in this. My staff is only an expert in one area. But some of the other leaders that you're going to hear from shortly started thinking, wait a minute, maybe we could be the conveners. We agree we're not the experts in all things, but we have an opportunity, and I think a responsibility, to convene meetings like this where we have an opportunity to share information and then at the end really have an opportunity for a call for action. And so if I can, I'm just going to pause for a minute here and just kind of highlight a few things. And you're going to hear these over again, but I'm just going to move through some of the things just to set the tone. First, the United States represents between 4 and 5% of the world's population. However, we consume more than 60% of the world's supply of prescription drugs. Yep, you heard that correctly. 4 to 5% of the population, 60% of the world's prescription drugs. Within that prescription drug area, 80% of the world's supply of hydrocodone, which is the most widely abused painkiller in the United States, 80% is consumed in the U.S. Of the worldwide supply of OxyContin, 90% is consumed in the U.S. I mention those things because that's going to be part of the thread that comes through all of the conversations that you hear, is that if we do something about the abuse of prescription drugs, the issues that we're seeing in our emergency rooms today related to heroin use, overdoses, and death, if you pull that thread and you see where it all started, oftentimes, overwhelmingly oftentimes, it started with the misuse of prescription opiates. And so because of this has become a leading cause of deaths in our country, or in Ramsey County, one of the leading causes here in Minnesota, prescription drug overdoses account for more fatalities than cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin combined. All right, so that's the prescription side. We'll say that again. On the prescription side, prescription drug overdoses account for more fatalities than cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin combined. Specifically in the metro area, 60% of all fatal drug overdoses occur at the hand of prescription drug pill. 24% of all fatal drug overdoses occur at the hand of heroin. And these two opioid drug categories accounted for 85% of the fatal drug overdoses in 2014. So it doesn't mean that there aren't other drugs that we're going to talk about, but this evening it's going to be about prescription drugs. It's going to be about what we can do to reduce the availability of those things, and then also just give some facts associated with heroin usage. So it's with that, I'm going to turn it over to our local chiefs who are here as part of this, Chief Tom Kinney from the Mounds View Police Department, and Public Safety Director Bob Jacobson from New Brighton. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Sheriff. On behalf of the Mounds View Police Department, I just want to welcome everyone for attending here tonight to show your concern and interest in this very important topic of drug abuse and drug addiction. And before I say anything further, I want to point out that a misconception of where we are tonight, particularly this high school, Mounds View High School, is not in the city of Mounds View. Rather, we're in Arden Hills. And Arden Hills is serviced by the law enforcement agency by the Sheriff's Department. So I just want to make it clear that if you need law enforcement services here or in Arden Hills, call the Sheriff's office. We'd be happy to respond from Mounds View and help you out too, but it's a common question we get time and time again that people can't understand that Mounds View High School is not in Mounds View. Well, this problem of drug abuse in all its forms not only affects the user, the family, the friends, which you'll hear about shortly here tonight, but it expands much further out to the rest of the community. Many users will become involved with criminal activity in order to fund their addiction. Things like general theft, fraud, forgery, and just general disruptive, disorderly behaviors. And all of these activities can have much more far-reaching effects and implications than one might imagine. For instance, the person living next door to the loud music, the parties, constantly, the traffic going in and out. How about the identity theft victim? Constantly trying to figure out and handle their compromised financial accounts that have been fraudulently obtained. Or what about the physicians and the pharmacists that are tracking all the fraudulent medical prescriptions out there? All of these behaviors can impact neighbors, direct victims of these crimes, and again, the medical physicians and pharmacists trying to track these activities. While the families and the friends certainly receive the most direct impact from the drug user and abuser, let us not forget about all the others that are impacted as well. And again, I just want to appreciate the work that Sheriff Bostrom and his staff, the Know the Truth people here that put this together so we can all come together to talk about this important topic tonight. And I hope that each one of you will gain something of value that you can bring back to your homes. So thank you. And I have Director Jacobson from the New Brighton Department of Public Safety here to speak to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Again, welcome everyone to this community forum. This truly is, as indicated, a community issue. You're going to hear tonight about a lot of issues revolving around drug use, addiction, and one of the things that we have finally come to realize in the law enforcement profession is that we cannot arrest ourselves out of this situation. We need help. And that's why there are so many resources here tonight. That's why there are so many of us from several different disciplines that want to try to help. That's why I hope that parents and students are here to, again, realize that this is a community-wide issue that we really need to work on together, because not one of us can do this alone. Not one of us can make enough of a difference or an impact to truly turn this trend around. And that trend does include, as you hear tonight, overdoses have become so prevalent. We've had one gentleman who has overdosed twice. Both times we had to do CPR to bring him back, and he is still around today, but twice he has overdosed. One of the issues that we don't talk about very often is driving under the influence of controlled substances. We've seen a huge increase on young men and women and older adults who are driving under the influence of not only prescription drugs, but of heroin and methamphetamine. We had a gentleman that was 18 years of age that we arrested at 9 o'clock in the morning about a month ago for driving under the influence of a controlled substance, and he said, why don't you go out and arrest drunk drivers? Again, he was a danger to himself, he was a danger to others, and again, we need a lot of help from everyone else to try to prevent those issues, to keep people safe, not only on the roadways, but in our communities. And again, it's a community issue, it's a community problem, and we want to be a part of that conversation to try to work on this along with you. So again, thank you for being here tonight. I look forward to the presentations. And again, if you have any questions, we'll be around tonight to help answer them. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm John Choi, and I am your Ramsey County Attorney, and it's really my honor and privilege to be here with all of you, and it's just great to see this really great turnout, because our communities will always be stronger when we have committed, engaged parents and community members who are thinking about really important issues, and this topic is really an important one, because from my perspective, and I know from the sheriffs and the two chiefs that spoke to you, we oftentimes are in the role of reacting to our social problems, right? And you know, a lot of the people that are coming into the criminal justice system, in fact, 65% of all the people that are in jail or in prison in the United States are addicted to drugs. And if you include people who are there because of drug offenses, it actually goes up to about 80-some%. And so it has this huge impact. But one of the things that I really like to do, as one of my favorite things to do as the county attorney, is to participate and be connected to our problem-solving courts, our drug court in Ramsey County. And oftentimes I go to the graduation ceremony and I get a chance to connect to those who are going through that program and who have graduated. And it's so great to see those young men and women who are turning their lives around because they have done such crazy things, actually. The addiction drives people to do just the worst things that you could ever imagine to the people that you love the most, your own children, your mom and dad, your brother, your sister, your best friend. And I see that time and time again. And so I wanted to, if there's anybody here in the audience who has children who are suffering from addiction and you're dealing with all of that, I just want to say thank you, because one of the things that I know about those individuals that make it through drug court and find the light at the end of the tunnel, it's because people like very committed parents who have stayed with their children despite all of the craziness and the hardship. And so I just encourage all of you, if they're ever in that situation, to just, as hard as it is, to love anybody that you love going through addiction and support them. So having said that, I think tonight, as we think about these issues and learn and get more educated about some of these issues, I think it's so important because, as Bob Jacobson said, we really need to think about not dealing with our problems in the criminal justice system, but really thinking about it from a standpoint of prevention. And if there's anything that we can do to, first of all, to become more educated about the problem and to better identify these issues that might be happening within our own families, and then to think about effective ways to intervene, all of that's going to matter not only for the people that you love, but it's going to matter for our community. And so with that, I know that we're going to have some great stories to share, and we're going to have some great information. But I just want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your lives to be here tonight. Thank you.
Well, good evening. My name is Ryan O'Neill. I'm a commander with the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. I'm currently assigned to the Violent Crime Enforcement Team. And you may ask what that is. That is a multi-jurisdictional group made up of members from St. Paul, Roseville, Maplewood, White Bear Lake, and New Brighton Police Departments, and then the Sheriff's Office. VSET targets enforcement efforts on upper-level narcotics distributors, violent offenders, gang members, and career criminals to stop the flow of narcotics and weapons into our region. As one of the chiefs mentioned, we can't arrest our way out of this, but our job is to try to make those streets safer for everyone. We also collaborate with the community. We work with other agencies throughout the Minnesota and throughout the nation, and we offer public education on drug and gang awareness for the community. We partner with organizations such as Neighborhood House, St. Paul Youth Services, and Save Our Sons to help at-risk youth and youth who want to leave gangs. I'm here tonight to talk more about what we see on the street, what are the trends with drugs here. And number one, you're going to see here it actually is 8 years stats, what we've collected on an annual basis in pounds on different kinds of drugs and firearms. And if you look in the last couple of years here, you'll see we've over 128 pounds in 2014 of methamphetamine, and now this year already we've got 8.25 pounds of heroin that we've seized from drug dealers. We are looking at a record year already this year, and we just continue to find more and more drugs coming in on the streets. One of the main drugs we see is marijuana. This is not going away. Marijuana is a very popular drug, and we see this everywhere. One of the new trends we see is butane hash oil, or it's often called butter or wax or honey oil. This is a high concentrated THC that is stripped from the plant. And as you see here, marijuana from the 1980s was approximately 4% THC. This drug is 80 to 95% THC. It's very, very powerful. It's very addictive. It's very strong. It can cause hallucinations. Not only is it a very addictive drug, it's a very dangerous drug. The drug is created through a process using butane to strip the THC from the plant. Well, butane is a highly flammable product that has a low flash point, and these labs that are in California right now are exploding. People are dying. We see labs now in Minnesota as well, and they're extremely dangerous. These pictures here are from a BHO lab that we found this spring. 10 pounds of the product was seized, and it's, like I mentioned, extremely dangerous. So if you see a lab, or just like back in the mid-90s and early 2000s with the meth labs, if you see something like this with the butane, you want to call the police right away because it's extremely dangerous. One of the other things with this product is kids are using vaporizers to smoke it, and they use the vaporizer oil with it, so it no longer smells like marijuana. You could be in a car with someone with this product and not know that they were using marijuana. We have an influx of synthetic drugs or bath salts. There's a continued widespread use. They're sold in retail stores. They're not on the shelves, so they'll only be sold to customers that are known to the retail owner. And then they're sold online and distributed online, often under the warning of not for human consumption as a bath salt or something like that. Again, kids are using e-cigarettes and vaporizers to smoke these as well. And the danger with these is no one knows for sure what exactly is in this product. You could have two packages identically the same package, labeled and everything the same, with two different kinds of chemicals inside of it. So when someone overdoses and they go to the ER, doctors have no idea what's been ingested, and it's extremely difficult to treat those people. We also see Molly, or MDMA, which is a new form of ecstasy, or a different brand of ecstasy. It's branded as and marketed as a pure crystalline powder form of MDMA, but it is traditionally just the same as ecstasy. And then we have methamphetamine. We have a lot of methamphetamine. It comes in by the truckload, literally. We've seen more and more come in. We see different colors. You'll see it's hard to see, but it's green, different marketing. Most of the meth that we see in Minnesota now comes from Mexican cartels. There's not many meth labs anymore, not a lot of homegrown meth. This is photos from a 45-pound or 40-pound seizure we had earlier this year. And this is from an 85-pound seizure, multi-jurisdictional investigation that was a statewide investigation. And this is not uncommon. 45, 80 pounds is very, very common. And then what we talked about earlier, prescription medications. In the last 10 years, there's been an incredible increase in the abuse of prescription meds such as oxycodone or hydrocodone. And the abuse starts with prescriptions. Maybe you get a prescription yourself, or a parent has a prescription, you try it, you get hooked on it, you use what's in the medicine cabinet, that only lasts so long, then you start going to your friends and family, taking it from their medicine cabinets, and then eventually that's gone, or that resource is gone, so then you'll start buying the prescription medications. Eventually that gets a little difficult too, and hard to find, and then you'll move to heroin. Heroin's often cheaper and easier to find than prescription medications, and opioids, those prescription meds, and heroin are identically the same. They're the same chemical compound. 3 out of 4 people that abuse prescription drugs will definitely migrate to heroin. 3 out of 4. Heroin has become a huge problem across the country in our metro area. This is a 7-pound seizure that the VSET unit got earlier this year. It's the largest seizure we've ever seen, and it just continues to keep coming in. And with drug trafficking, you have large amounts of cash. And when you have large amounts of cash, you've got lots of violence. So these things all go hand in hand. These pictures here are from an individual who was dealing drugs and using drugs and swore he'd never be taken alive by police. And when he was finally stopped, the gun there was in the back of the car, and he was screaming at his passenger who was in the back seat to hand him his gun so he could shoot it out with the officers. Luckily, that particular individual realized he'd probably get shot too and refused to hand the gun over. He had a bulletproof vest in the trunk, and he had actual bulletproof panels sewn into his sweatshirt. These are dangerous people. We're seeing multiple violent homicides linked to the drug trade, and it's a large problem. So that leads to trafficking. So large loads of this product, both heroin, methamphetamine, marijuana, are coming in from California, Mexico, different distribution areas. They're using social media to distribute the drugs and market the drugs, and we're seeing an increase in violence, as I mentioned, due to the more and more cartels being involved. The Sinaloa cartel on the western border of Mexico, that whole yellow area is primarily the Sinaloa cartel area. They are delivering most of the methamphetamine to the metro area. It either comes through San Diego and up through Seattle and then across the plains, or it'll come through in Arizona, Phoenix, and then come to the 35 corridor and up through the Mississippi Valley. Once it gets to Minnesota, it's distributed around the metro area and then obviously around the 5-state area. And now we're starting to see meth going east from Minnesota. So we've become an actual trafficking hub for methamphetamine. We also have heroin coming from the Mexican cartels and heroin coming in from Chicago gangs. So you look at that map, and basically all areas point to the Twin Cities. Mexico is able to produce massive amounts of methamphetamine in these super labs they have. They get hundreds of pounds per production cycle, and they distribute it all across the United States. And they are hiding it very well. They hide it in cars. I don't know if you saw recently, there was a tunnel from Tijuana to San Diego that was recently discovered that they were using. They're being more and more creative to try and defeat law enforcement's efforts. So what does that mean to us? Well, in the last few years, we've seen more and more admissions for abuse of both methamphetamine and heroin. We might be seeing a leveling off of heroin if that trend continues, but meth keeps spiking up. We're seeing it reaching levels of where it was in 2005 with the epidemic with the homegrown labs. And then, as we've heard already, more and more deaths related to overdose. In 2013, 132 deaths in Hennepin County related to opiates, and then last year in Ramsey County, 42. And those opiates include both prescription drugs, methadone, and heroin, and all three are basically the same drug. So with that being said, one of the keys that we want to have, I'm going to skip ahead here and go back to that slide. One of the keys is to keep your prescription medications safe. Lock them up at home, and when you're done with them, get rid of them. Ramsey County has 3 collection points where you can get rid of those drugs. They're open Monday through Friday from 9 to 4, or 8 to 4, I'm sorry. And this flyer's in your folder so you can know where to go, but there's one at Ramsey County's patrol station at Arden Hills, one downtown St. Paul, and now a new one just opened up in North St. Paul. And this is through a partnership with Public Health. Then back to this, we can't do it alone. Ramsey County and all law enforcement are here to work with you to solve this problem. We need your help. One of the things we need is if you see something wrong, don't wait to call it in. 911 is no longer just an emergency phone number. This number is available for you to call and let us know that you saw somebody doing something strange or you've seen what you think is suspicious activity. Call and let us know, and we'll figure it out. Take advantage of that. And then remember, the internet is a great source of information. What I've said tonight is just a tip of the iceberg on what's out there. Get on the internet, find out what's out there, what kids are doing, what's going on. And remember, you have influence on your children. Although it may not seem like it. I have a 6-year-old. I know it doesn't seem like you have influence, but you do have influence. And in those times when it's time to make a decision, if you pound that message home, hopefully it'll be still in their mind. Of course, we can't always be successful with that. Kids are going to make bad choices, and that's when you need to ask for help. And that's what the next group is going to talk about. They will go over some of those options and give you some resources. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Deputy William Rzutek. I'm the school resource officer here. I've been here 3 years. This is the start of my 4th year. I like to piggyback on what Chief Jacobson said, that you can't arrest your way out of it. I think when I come to work, my goal is not to arrest kids. It's more to not arrest kids if I can help it. I've seen trends over the last 3 years very similar to what Ryan was saying. Kids seem to start with marijuana, try prescription pills, and then it kind of goes downhill from there. They're not able to get pills and stuff like that. So if you do have prescription drugs, definitely lock them up, get rid of them, bring them to the sheriff's department, stuff like that. I get parents that call me on the weekends, at night, stuff like that. Try to always answer my phone. Parents, kids. If we don't know what's going on, there's not a lot we can do about it. We keep an eye on the kids, but I mean, we have 1,700 and some kids just at the school alone, so we can't watch everything. We follow up when you guys call, it's great. Especially, I mean, I'll get my cell phone number out. Some guys don't like to do that. I don't mind doing it because then you can get a hold of me right away. I've helped a lot of parents get kids into treatment that have gotten pretty bad off too. So, like I said, I don't even wear a uniform to work most days. Develop a pretty good relationship with the kids where they're not scared to come up and approach you about stuff. Same way with the parents. I mean, don't feel that if you call me, I'm going to chase your kid down and try to arrest them or find them with something bad. That's the last goal I have is if I can keep them out of the justice system, that's kind of my goal. We have a lot of other avenues that we can go. Diversion, there's a lot of things we can do. The key is to get them help. It's not to get them a criminal record. So keep that in mind if you're going to contact us to try to help you out, that we're not looking to get your kid. So, and there'll be a question and answer session a little bit later. So if anybody has any questions then, you feel free to ask. So I'll give you a card after if you need it. Thanks.
How you guys doing? My name's Kevin. I work for the Know the Truth program that goes out into the schools, so I'm just going to kind of share my story with you guys. For me, I'm actually from down the street in Roseville. Born and raised there. I grew up in a really good family. You know, I was always provided for, always had everything that I needed, but I had a thing called an older brother. And growing up with an older brother, you know, I always wanted to impress him. I always wanted to be hanging out with him, and I got to, but as the younger brother, you know, I endured the jokes, and that just kind of made me insecure. I was always bigger than my older brother, so I was always worried about like my body and my weight issues, and I didn't really know how to deal with that. For the longest time, I used sports as my platform to deal with that stuff. But transitioning into high school, sports wasn't enough anymore just because of the kind of all the pressures. Of course, you know, being at school with my older brother now, the girls I wanted to impress and all that stuff. And I didn't know what to do. So a couple of my best friends, the guys I was friends with in middle school and stuff, decided to drink one night, and they asked if I wanted to. They didn't pressure me into do it. They just asked. And, you know, after I had watched for a while, I realized, like, nothing bad was happening to them. You know, I was told my whole life, you know, if you do this, this is going to happen. If you do this, you're going to get in trouble for this. And I watched my friends do it, and nothing happened. So I decided I was going to make an opinion for myself, and I decided to drink. And when I drank, I found that it got me outside of my insecurities. I didn't care so much about what other people thought. But because sports was a priority in my life, I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to get in trouble, so I didn't drink too often. One of those same buddies a couple months later, though, introduced me to weed. It was a month after that I was smoking weed every single day. I got my first minor my junior year in high school. And when I got that minor, you know, my parents kind of came down on me a little bit, but they gave me a set of rules and a set of standards. And I knew if I met those standards, I'd get that freedom. So I always knew what I was supposed to do, and if I did this, then I could go and do this. And I was really good at, you know, saying the right thing to my parents. I watched my mom manipulate her whole life, and I learned that trait from her, and I knew how to do it. I knew how to play mom against dad, dad against mom, and that's what I did. I ended up getting caught drinking again my senior year, and the way I ended high school was sitting out the last 6 weeks of my senior baseball season. But again, I didn't think it was a big deal. It was like, hey, I got a 3.2 GPA. I was an all-conference baseball and hockey player. I'm going to college to play ball. Like, I'm all right. Y'all worry about you. And I went to college, and it was about a month and a half into college, I broke my foot. And like sports was my life, and when I didn't have sports, I didn't really have an identity anymore. And I just kind of sunk into the party scene, failed out of that first year of college, came back home, started hanging out with those old friends. That's when I got introduced to prescription pills. Started to realize it was becoming a problem, so I moved down to Florida, not realizing how many prescription pills were down there. And I just got full-fledged into my addiction down there. Came back home. There was no pills around anymore, but my best friend from up here had upgraded to heroin. I never intended to do it, but because I was withdrawing and I couldn't find pills, that's what I turned to. And heroin made me into a monster. Started stealing from my family. I have a little brother, he's 8 years younger than me. Started stealing from him and his friends when they're 12, 13 years old. Like, it didn't matter who you were or what your relationship was to me. Like, if you had something I wanted, I was going to take it from you. That's how consumed I was by heroin. about a 5-year addiction for me, in and out of treatment a few different times, staying clean long enough to get my family back into my life, to just like burn those bridges again. And the moment for me was about 3 years ago. It was just after Thanksgiving. I was driving down the road in my truck, and I ran out of gas, and I pulled over to the side of the road, and it was in that moment like I realized I didn't have any money for gas, didn't have any money for food, I didn't have a place to live anymore, I didn't have any friends anymore. My family was to the point where they weren't picking up my phone calls. I was at a place in my life where like I wanted to kill myself. Like that's how bad it got. And I remember sitting there thinking, the most pivotal moment in my life, I was sitting there thinking like, man, I wish somebody would call me. I just don't want it to be my mom. And my phone rang 30 seconds later, and it was my mom. And that changed my life. And I went to treatment, and I started working on all my issues. And life has been really good. Like, I work for this organization, going to schools now, and like I have more confidence than I ever thought. You know, standing up here, like if I could encourage you guys as like parents for your kids, the one thing I would encourage you guys more than anything is I never thought my parents screwed up. I never thought they made mistakes, so I was afraid to share my mistakes with them. But once I realized like my mom made mistakes and stuff, I felt lied to. And I always wished they would have just shared that stuff with me, because then I would have known it was okay to talk to them about that stuff. And then the other thing is stay on the same page. I knew how to play mom against dad so easy, and that's why it was so easy for me. So I appreciate you guys listening to my story. Thank you very much. Now I get to introduce my boss and the director of Know the Truth, Adam Peterson.
Good evening. My name is Adam Peterson. Privileged to be here tonight with you. Try to adjust this a little bit. I'm a walker. Like I like to walk around with the mic, but they put this little thing on here for recording, so I got to stay here, unfortunately. So bear with me as I kind of adjust. So my name's Adam Peterson. I'm on staff at Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. It's a drug and alcohol treatment and recovery program. They have short-term, long-term, inpatient, and outpatient services for teens and adults all across the state of Minnesota. We have about 600 people in our program. We have a licensed Rule 31 program called Life Renewal, anywhere from 7 to 90 days, depending on client need, and they also deal with dual diagnosis. And then we have a long-term program as well, and a new therapeutic boarding school for teen boys out in the Buffalo St. Michael area. In 2006, Teen Challenge really wanted to get in on the front end. So we have been treating addiction in Minnesota for 30 years, but we really wanted to try to prevent it, as you've heard some of the speakers already say. And I do want to take this moment. How many of you guys have a different perspective of your law enforcement in this community than when you walked in the doors? Awesome. Terrific. Tonight is really about clearly communicating that all of these entities, they work very closely together. A lot of times we think, oh, they do their thing, but really they all want to help. And that's what we do at Know the Truth as well, working in the high schools and middle schools, speaking to the students. We aren't going to stop your kids from using drugs and alcohol by ourselves. We are just a cog in the wheel. We are just a tool, a resource for the schools and for the other community organizations. And so we've been working since 2006. We work in the high schools and middle schools. People like Kevin go into the schools and share their stories. We talk about gateway drugs, hereditary use, all of those things. And so we also collect data from the schools, and I'm going to share some of that information here. Hopefully we don't have, there we go. I'm going to go back to this previous slide for a second. So just to piggyback, we got a great perspective on all of those drugs. One thing I do want to just add is that whole idea of like the gateway drugs. So we saw the treatment admissions and the amount of meth and heroin that's being seized, and we hear meth and we hear heroin and we think, no way that would happen to my kid. But really it is because of some of these prescription medications and just the whole idea of the gateway drug, people starting somewhere. No one plans on becoming addicted like Kevin talked about, but there are so many different elements to this that we'll talk about throughout the evening. But really, and that's what we focus on in the schools, is talking about the cigarettes, the alcohol, the marijuana, the prescription pills, and the different influences. Friends, family, media, those types of things. And this is an interesting thing here. kind of focused a lot on the prescription pills, and one of the biggest things that I'm glad so many people emphasize is this is preventable, you guys. Over 70% is taken from family or friends. If we lock it up, if we move it to a high traffic area so someone can't shut the bathroom door and have their way with it, we can prevent the availability of this stuff, make it more difficult for them too. Because when we talk about the chemical makeup of these things, in 8 days of using a prescription opiate, as prescribed, you can develop a dependence to it. And so we really want to try to limit the availability of it, and we can limit the potential of addiction. 62%, these are the top 12 reasons why a teen would use. That first one right off the bat, easy to get. We gotta get that percentage down. Easy to get through other people's prescriptions, perceived as safe. Parents don't care as much if I get caught. How many of you are familiar with a pill called Adderall? Okay. Now, what you might not know is it's a Schedule II drug, which means if your kid gets caught with just one pill and they don't have a prescription for it, that's a felony. That could be a felony. And so it's really, these consequences are pretty severe. And so we really need to take this seriously. So here is some of the data that we've collected from the schools in Ramsey County. 29% of the students in the high school have used illegal drugs. This percentage is pretty average, a little bit higher than the state at 28%. And then of users, primarily people are using marijuana. 18% of users are using prescription pills. That's right around average as well for the state. In regards to drinking, 45%. And the interesting thing here is, so that number is below average, but how many of you have heard your young person say, well, everyone's doing it, Mom? Anybody heard that? Yeah. That's a common misconception. And here's proof that not everyone's doing it, right? And we talk about that in the schools with the students, some of the misconceptions surrounding these things. One for marijuana is a lot of people say, well, it's natural. It's just a plant, right? Well, heroin comes from a plant. Cocaine comes from a plant. Alcohol comes from a plant. Tobacco is a plant, right? So just because something's a plant doesn't mean it can't be dangerous. And so those misconceptions are important to be aware of. Here is some of the numbers for the middle schools that we work with in your community. 7% have reported using, and again, that 91% is of users. Don't want anyone leaving thinking 91% of middle schoolers are using. And the interesting thing here, as well as you saw in the high school and in the middle school, is the binge drinking. Is anyone alarmed that it's so much higher for girls than guys? Is anyone alarmed by that? This is normal. We see more women binge drink than men, so it is normal. Well, binge drinking isn't normal. I want to be very clear about that, but that difference. So here's kind of from school to school, just so you can kind of see the differences. We see Mountains View High School there, some of the other schools in your community, and this is for the illegal drug use. Now, we don't want to talk all doom and gloom. We really want to focus on solutions, and we're going to have that as well towards the end. But here are the top 2 reasons why your students in Ramsey County don't want to use. And that's why I'm so excited we have such great partnership with the law enforcement here. Number 1, they don't want legal consequences. They don't want to run into any of these guys. Which I don't know why. They seem really nice, don't they? And then number 2, they care what you think. Regardless of how many times they say, I don't want you in my life, or I hate you, or you're just here to ruin my life, they really do value your opinion. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about that throughout. And then we see some of the influence that they have from our presentation. All right, so I've got another story for you guys. Really excited. Laura Zabinski's here this evening to share her story with you. She's the program manager for the Know the Truth program. It's been going into schools for the last couple of years. Can you please help me welcome Laura as she comes forward?
I'm a little shorter. As Adam said, my name is Laura, and I grew up in a really chaotic home, unlike Kevin. My parents were always fighting, and they got a divorce by the time I was 8 years old. And then bouncing back and forth between mom and dad's house, my dad's anger wasn't on my mom anymore, it was on my little brother and I. And so we experienced a lot of abuse at home. And my dad was one of those guys with really high expectations, and he wanted me to play sports, be a part of the popular crowd, and get straight A's. And to be honest with you, I had a really good group of friends. I had really good grades, but I don't run ever. Like, running sounds awful. And so my dad pushed me in the area of sports, and I was really interested in art, and he didn't get that. And things got so bad that I moved out when I was 13 years old. But coming into high school, I really struggled. I really struggled with that idea that I was never going to be good enough because that's what my dad told me. I severely battled depression and anxiety, and so when I was invited to a birthday party my freshman year of high school, I made the decision to go, and little did I know that the party revolved around drinking. And I watched my friends drink, and as Kevin said, you hear about all of the bad things that are going to happen. You hear it from class, you hear it from teachers, and none of those things were actually happening. And so I made the decision to try it out, and I fell in love right away. And that became my thing. I partied off and on the weekends, and I think my mom had speculations, but she was afraid to ask the questions. And as the parties progressed, naturally the drugs progressed. I started smoking marijuana on a regular basis, and then I started watching my friends use the heavier drugs, like heroin, cocaine, Molly. And I never, ever envisioned being around those drugs, let alone seeing my friends use those drugs. And so I actually made the firm commitment, I'm never gonna cross that line. I'm gonna stick to the basic drugs because that's what's safe. But I was so wrong in that thought process. The summer before my senior year of high school, I was coming home from a house party, and I had a friend in the passenger seat. And I said, dude, why don't you crash on my couch tonight? I'll take you to work in the morning. He said, cool. And this wasn't just some like random guy. This is someone that I had known for about 4 years, someone that I considered a close friend. But when we got back to my house, it turned out unlike any other night, and I was unfortunately sexually assaulted by a close friend. I was terrified. I felt powerless. I felt like I wasn't allowed to talk about it. I didn't know what to say, and I made the decision to keep it a secret. Coming into senior year of high school, my depression and my anxiety skyrocketed, and by choosing not to talk about it, that's the thought that haunted me every single day. And I turned to drinking and smoking to cope. Didn't matter if it was a weekend, weekday. And one Thursday after school, I came home with my best friend, and we ended up going through a liter of vodka in less than a half hour, and I blacked out. And I'd like to say, like, blackout was something abnormal, but that's where I, drove my drinking, is to black out, because that's where I felt the best. I didn't have to think about anything, I didn't have to process anything, and there were many mornings that were very scary. But this particular day, I'd gotten behind the wheel. I'd swerved into oncoming rush hour traffic and was arrested less than 2 miles away from my house. I went to two different police stations, ended up at the hospital, and my mom made the decision right there to send me to a 10-day adolescent lockdown facility. But 10 days wasn't enough. And the guy down the hall was screaming because he's withdrawing from heroin. And in my mind, I'm just drinking and smoking. I don't have a problem. I thought that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I laid low for a little bit, prom season kicked up, and naturally I started drinking and I started smoking again. And then graduation hit, and that's kind of when reality kicked in. I had no game plan. I graduated high school with straight A's, and I didn't apply for colleges. I didn't take ACTs, and I lost my job because I lost my license. Things weren't looking super good. And I knew in that moment I wanted something different. I wanted my life to amount to something. And so I started going to support groups with my friends. And I found out there that it's okay to talk about the tough days and the tough things. And I made the decision to share what I had been through. And then on November 18th of 2011, I made the decision to give up my 7-year relationship with drinking and smoking. And so it's awesome that I'll be celebrating 4 years clean. And as my mom and I reflect on the things that I've been through, she just wishes she would have asked the tough questions, that she would have set rules and guidelines for me. And that's my biggest advice to you. Thank you guys for listening to my story.
All right. So at this time, too, I'd like to just draw your attention to the folder that you have. We've got a lot of good resources in here. On the left side, there is some blue sheets of paper surveys. You're going to have time to fill this out during the Q&A time, but your opinion, we really value your opinion. Also, there's a sheet that's got drug lingo, different names of each of the drugs, and then there's holding a conversation, and there's also a great resource from MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, The Power of Talk. That's a great resource if you're talking to your young person about addiction. And then also a warning signs checklist. And so I want to kind of talk a little bit about that. What are some things to look for? What are some warning signs? Family history of addiction, this is a big one, you guys. We know there's a predisposition. We know that this can be a hereditary thing. And it doesn't necessarily mean that if your dad was an addict, you are going to be an addict. But we also know there's a big role that environment plays in this. If you grow up watching your mom and your dad drink every night, and that's how they relax, that's how they have fun, you're learning that as a young person, and that's going to have an impact. Abuse, neglect, traumatic childhood experience. We just heard an incredible and just heart-wrenching example of that in Laura's story, and we know that that is traumatic, but there's other things that are categorized as trauma too. Going a divorce where the mom talks bad about dad, dad talks bad about mom, and the kids in the middle just feeling like it's their fault. Moving schools, losing friends, the death of a loved one, a family member. These are all things that adolescents can be traumatic for them and a turning point for them as well. And so it's important to be aware of these transition times. Increased borrowing of money. This is a big one as well. Another thing that we had a forum on Tuesday night in a different community, and two of our speakers spoke, and they said a warning sign to my parents would have been the fact that I wasn't asking for money. Both of these young guys would deal drugs, and so they didn't need money because they were getting it illegally. And so that's another thing to look for as well. If they aren't relying on you for certain things and they've got nice clothes, they've got these things, where are they getting the money from? A big thing with the increased borrowing of money is asking for receipts. I'd have to check with law enforcement, but the last time I checked, I think drug dealers don't give receipts, right? So here's a big thing is asking for receipts. If you're giving them the money, it's your right to know. You can also get preloaded debit cards that you can track the expenses. Increased secrecy about possessions. Oh, jumping around a little too much here. If they have a backpack that they don't let out of their sight, they take it with them everywhere, that's a warning sign. That's something to look at. Maybe ask them to take a look in the backpack. A lot of times, too, people will carry it on them so they don't leave it. But also hiding places in the bedrooms, underneath the bed, taping it to things, in the drawers. Sometimes they make little hideouts for stuff as well. And we can't have a conversation about this issue without talking about brain development. How many of you have been in a situation with a young person and said, don't you just get it? If you do this, this will happen. We can all be honest here, right? I think we've all been there. Here's the thing, you guys. They don't. They don't. So brain development, there's a little slide up here that kind of shows the coloration. And down here, as the gray matter dissipates, we see the brain is more fully developed. The interesting part is the last part of the brain to fully develop is the frontal lobe, which controls reasoning, planning, emotions, and problem solving, and also the ability to make decisions. And so we know that it is a little bit later in our life, and we also know that any deviation from normal brain development, so if someone starts using drugs at 13, at 15, your brain doesn't develop like it normally should. And so it's important to be aware of this. And so it's not just about telling them, hey, if you do this, this is going to happen. We really got to work with them to see the impact of their choices. Also, the Axe spray here. If your son comes home smelling like he just got done at an Axe deodorant commercial, chances are that it's not true, right? You know, I'd ask to see the check that he's getting. This is an alcoholic's best friend. There's alcohol in it, and so it's very easy to use as a cover-up. Some other things to look for: changes in conversation, talking in code, missing prescription drugs. Again, we cannot stress the importance. And this isn't just prescription drugs. How many people are familiar with triple C's? Anybody heard that before? I see a lot of the younger hands going up. Yeah. So Coricidin, cough and cold, this is over-the-counter stuff. Robitussin, NyQuil, these are all substances that people can abuse. And it's that behavior, it's that addictive behavior that we really got to address. It's not just about, oh, the drug they're using isn't that bad. Because the concern is if they develop a tolerance to something, they could move to something that is much stronger. And so it's that behavior we really want to try to intervene with. Weight loss, sudden interest in losing weight, bloodshot eyes, eye drops. And I'm just going to go through these pretty quick here. Reasons for first use, obviously, like there are so many different things that can lead. We just heard 2 great examples of different things that led to first use in Kevin's story and in Laura's story. But experimentation is big, boredom, instant gratification, easy access. Covering up, that's a big one, especially for guys. A lot of guys have the mindset that Kevin had, that it's not okay to talk about my problems. I got to be a guy, suck it up. And that's a big one. Self-medication as well. We heard Laura talk about not feeling comfortable talking about the struggles she had emotionally and with that traumatic event. There is a huge stigma, especially associated with the mental health aspect of this. And then misinformation is a big one as well. So it's important to be aware of those things and things to look for. Our next speaker, though, I'm really excited to bring forward this individual. We met Lori, a little while ago, over a year ago, almost a year ago, and she is so brave. This individual has come forward. We started forums a few years ago in Anoka County, and we had a parent come forward who had unfortunately lost her son, and she shared her story at these different forums, and then she entered a support group for other people that have lost and got connected with Lori, and so it's just an incredible story. But Lori's going to come forward and share her and her family's story with you. Can we please welcome her as she comes forward?
Good evening. 16 months ago, on July 10th, my son Ryan died of a heroin overdose. He struggled with the disease of addiction for 1.5 to 2 years, an addiction that began with opiates and moved to heroin, and the progression was rapid. Never would I have thought I'd be standing up here, sharing Ryan's story with you tonight. But my husband and I, along with our children, feel that if it'll help one family or individual, then we'll share. I'd like to briefly share Ryan's story, our story, in hopes that it brings more awareness to our communities that this wicked drug, heroin, as well as other opiates, are in our communities. There's no town that hasn't been affected by heroin, and our loved ones are using this drug, and they are dying. This can happen to any one of us. It can start by using pain meds for a simple dental or medical procedure, or with recreational use, and it can easily and quickly lead to addiction. These drugs are just a tweet, a text, a Snapchat, Facebook. They can be delivered right to your door at any time of the day or night. Ryan was the oldest of our 4 children. He was just 23 years old. And if you asked anyone to describe him, they would tell you he was intelligent, artistic, creative, energetic, and had a goofy sense of humor and a passion for music. He was so much fun to be around. He excelled in music, art, and photography. He was most content when he was playing guitar, painting, drawing, or taking pictures. He had much to offer. Ryan's substance use began toward the end of his junior year. We had suspected he was smoking pot, and that assumption proved to be right. At that time, he entered a 30-day outpatient program, and he attended school and treatment during the day there. After the 30 days, he returned to Tartan to finish out his junior year, and he graduated in 2009, and the next few years were uneventful. In December of 2012, Ryan's girlfriend called. They had been living together for about a year. She had stated that Ryan was feeling a little depressed, and she was worried about him. Ryan then called, stating that nothing was worth anything, nothing was going right. I immediately drove over there and realized the situation was not good. I convinced him to go to the ER. It was during that ER visit that we learned that Ryan had opiates and benzos in his system. He had anxiety, so the benzos I did understand, but the opioids, where did he get them from? Well, one of the places he got them from was me. I had had back surgery a year earlier, and he had taken the leftover pain meds. We did not have them locked up. And why didn't we? These meds kill, guns kill. We locked those up. I didn't think about it, and I didn't think I had to worry. Not my kid, not my family. How could this have happened? We addressed the issue with Ryan, and he stated that he'd not been happy having financial issues and asked if him and his girlfriend could move in, and we agreed. Within the month, they moved in. And things were a little rocky. We had 3 younger children. They had to get up for school. We had to get up for work. It was the usual rules they had to follow. In the months that followed, Ryan seemed more angry and irritated and became more irritated easily. It was hard to even have a conversation with him. And again, we questioned the substance use, and he denied. I had also noticed during this time that he was often sick with flu-type symptoms in the morning that resolved by the afternoon. But I couldn't put the pieces together, that these were withdrawal symptoms. And how could I miss this? And I'm even a nurse. Again, I would ask him all kinds of questions. How could you be so sick in the morning and feeling better in the afternoon? No one gets better this quickly. Ryan finally got tired of all our questions from us as well as his girlfriend, and he moved out and they broke up. And this was very difficult because we had no way to know where he was or what he was doing. One day, Ryan brought his clothes over to wash, and I thought I'd be nice and start the laundry for him. I went in to grab the wash to put the stuff in the dryer, and I felt something in one of his socks. I pulled out a needle, and I didn't get it. Why was this in his sock? I called Ryan, but no answer. I called his girlfriend and asked if she knew anything about it. And she had actually been talking to his roommate, and they had suspected he was using heroin. How could this be? This was the kid who cried every year when he had to go in and get his flu shot up until the time he was 17. How could he be using IV drugs? We couldn't wrap our heads around it, but we knew we had to get him help. So we moved Ryan back home and made a visit to the ER. And the ChemDep counselor at that time recommended inpatient treatment, and there were no beds available in the Twin City area. So we brought him home and helped him through his withdrawal symptoms and literally watched him 24 hours through the whole weekend. We didn't let him out of our sight. It was exhausting. On Monday, we got him into an intensive outpatient treatment along with AA meetings nightly. During the second week of outpatient treatment, we got a call that Ryan was in the ER. He was having withdrawal symptoms, which meant he was using during treatment. They again recommended inpatient treatment and would not accept him back into outpatient because of the drug use. My husband and I were not on the same page for the recommendation. I wanted Ryan admitted, and my husband and Brian felt that we could get through this together with AA meetings, counseling, and outpatient treatment. And so we went this route for a while, had random UAs done, and had him check in with us multiple times a day. This did work for a few weeks, and then again, Ryan relapsed. At this point, I could not stand by and watch this, and I contacted the counselors at St. John's Hospital and asked for help. Because it was on a Friday, our only option was to bring him to the ER and put him on a 72-hour hold, and we just did not want to do that. And so instead, we took him home and watched him and helped him go through withdrawal symptoms the entire weekend. He went everywhere with us. He slept in the same room with us. We stood outside an open bathroom door. On Monday, we got him in for a ChemDep assessment, and after many hours and much red tape, there was a bed open at Hazelton. By now, it was early October. Our son was safe for the time being, and we were exhausted. During this time, all our energy was focused on Ryan, keeping him safe and in recovery. And our other 3 children lacked our attention. And what they did get was a very little bit that we had left. Most of the time, that was not much. We didn't even have the patience for the smallest of their needs. And there were times when I would lay down in bed at the end of the night and ask my husband if the other kids were home safe in bed. This disease affects the whole family, and it's so very isolating. During the first day at Hazelton, we all attended a 4-day parent and sibling group and learned so much about this disease. After 28 days in Hazelton, Ryan had gained 23 pounds. He was back to his old self, and he was again full of life and in recovery. But within that week, he had relapsed, and in fact, we would find out he used the same night he came home. So back in he went for another 14 days. After that discharge, Ryan had been in recovery for approximately 5 weeks when I received a call from my daughter stating that her car would not start and she had to go to work. So I told her to go downstairs and see if Ryan was home and if he could give her a ride. Within minutes, she had called frantic. She had me on one line and 911 on the other. Ryan had overdosed. She had found him unresponsive, blue, and barely breathing. He was brought to Regions, and I met them there. And as I sat in the room, reminding Ryan to breathe every time the cardiac alarm went off, I just sat and cried and felt so helpless. How do I help my son? What's his rock bottom? Because I definitely hit mine. When his dad got to the ER, we talked to the doctors, nurses, and counselors and asked them what we could do. They told us to tell him he could not come home, that we weren't helping him and we were just enabling him. And to hear this as a parent is so hard because it goes against everything you do. But we left him, we told him this, and we left. This was unbearable, but we went home and we packed Ryan a bag, and he showed up and thought he was going to stay. And it was very hard to stick to our guns and tell him that he couldn't stay here. He left that night, and that January it was bitter cold. Neither my husband or I slept, not knowing if he was okay or where he was. He did call a day or two later and asked if he could come home. And our terms were that he could, but it required treatment. Reluctantly, he agreed and went back to Hazelton. Again, we felt relieved that Ryan was safe and in treatment. Ryan was in recovery for longer this time. The recovery time was longer, but the relapses were so much more severe. During recovery, he and his girlfriend got back together. He was hanging out with his friends again, having fun with his siblings, making music, drawing, painting, and laughing. Our Ryan was back, and it was so good to see this. After discharge, he was attending outpatient treatment, going to AA meetings, and working his program. Ryan very much wanted to get better. When I asked him what was so hard and what could I do to help him, he just said, "Mom, the physical and psychological cravings are just unbearable at times." And this was even on monthly Vivitrol injections, which are supposed to help reduce cravings. It was around the end of May when I suspected Ryan was using again, and we confronted him. He was slipping on his meetings and did not want to continue attending day treatment, and we were right. As parents, we were at our wits' end, exhausted, and in needed help for our son. And again, back he went to Hazelton at the beginning of June. This time we told Ryan what we were doing at home was not helping him, and on the advice of his counselors, he'd have to move into a sober house when he discharged. He was extremely angry with us and would not talk to us for about a week. He and my husband did finally talk one night. Ryan said, "Dad, am I ever going to get better?" And my husband said, "Yep, we're going to get through this together, buddy. We can do it." On Monday, July 7th, my husband picked him up from Hazelton and helped him move into the sober house in St. Paul. He was still very angry about the situation. He decided not to talk to us. We gave him time, and on Tuesday he called to talk. On Wednesday, I went to go pick Ryan up after work, brought him some clothes and bedding, and we went grocery shopping. We talked about how things were going to be, how things were going, and we made plans for the next day. I gave him a hug and a kiss. Told him I loved him and how good he looked. On Thursday afternoon, I received a call from a St. Paul officer who asked if he could come to talk to me at my work. My mind started racing. Where's my husband? Where's my kids? Where's Ryan? It can't be Ryan. He's safe in a sober house. Then I just asked him if it had anything to do with my kids to please just tell me. And he told me that my son Ryan had overdosed that morning. Well, what did this mean? Ryan had overdosed before. And I asked him again, not wanting to hear what he had to say. And he then told me his son was dead. He had died that morning of a heroin overdose. I just kept screaming, "No, no, no," over and over. This is not the way it was supposed to be. He was supposed to be in a sober house, in recovery, safe. We were supposed to work through this. The officer met me and drove me to my car and told me he had talked to my husband and gave me all the information he could at that time. On the way home, I was in shock. My phone rang and rang with my husband trying to reach me, but I just could not talk to him and hear his voice. This wasn't the way it was supposed to be. Ryan was supposed to be in recovery, get the job he's so hoped for, marry the love of his life, and celebrate all those first. He was robbed, and we were robbed. There is such a void in our lives now, and we miss him terribly. As a parent, we feel that we failed. We feel that we could not protect Ryan. I keep telling myself that there has to be a purpose in Ryan's death, for all the suffering, but I'm just not sure what that is. What I do know and what you've heard tonight is the face of addiction has changed. It can be any one of us. No longer can we say this will never happen to me, as it can and it does. No one chooses to become addicted. That person chooses to use that first time, and that drug chooses them. We as a community can recognize this, educate ourselves, and support people that suffer from this disease, just like we support people that suffer from diabetes or cancer or any other chronic disease. This brief period in my son's life was not what defined him. Ryan will always be remembered as a funny, talented, creative soul that he was, and he would have done great things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maury. So as we kind of come near the end, we're going to move into our Q&A time here in just a moment, but we really want you to leave tonight with some tangible things that you can do. Educating yourself, being here, this is step number one. We've got a lot of great resources out there. I would like to take this moment to recognize them. Fairview Riverside, Ramsey County Children's Crisis Response, Ramsey County Mental Health and Detox, St. Paul Ramsey County Public Health Options, Ramsey County Sheriff's Office, Know the Truth, Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, Quest 180, Nystrom and Associates, the Steve Rumler Foundation, and the Emily Program. A lot of great resources out in your community that are really trying to do whatever they can to help, and so please utilize the resources available. Locking up medication. Please, tonight, go home and take a look. Get it out of there if you don't need it anymore. The interesting thing, too, is we know our milk expires, right? You go to the fridge, you grab it, and it smells terrible. Our prescription pills expire as well. And some of these prescription pills have time-release capsules, and if it's past that date, you don't know how that's going to affect the person that's using it. A drug that was meant to hit them over 8 hours period of time could hit them all at once. We absolutely should be monitoring these things a lot more. Talk early and talk often. We got to get rid of this checklist mentality. This isn't, I don't think my dad had a checklist, but he had those talks once with me, the drug talk, the sex talk, the curfew talk, the driving talk, the friends talk. It doesn't matter how great of a public speaker you are. That conversation you have with your sixth grader is not going to transfer to 10th grade when they're at homecoming and that cute boy or that cute girl comes up to them, right? It doesn't matter how many PowerPoint slides you had. But if you have this conversation on a regular basis and you use current events to bring it up, things happen. We can't go a day in the news without hearing about something, someone getting in trouble, someone getting arrested, someone overdosing. And so using those current events to have this conversation and really create a comfortable environment for your young people to be able to approach you with this issue. Getting to know your child, and I know that might sound crazy, like, of course, I know my kid, but we know sometimes we can get into routines, right? Your kid comes home, you say, how was your day? It was fine. How was your day? It was fine. If you're sick and tired of getting the same response, change the question. It's good to know things that are going on in their life. It gives you the ability to know if something changes. A sudden change in interest could be a warning sign that something's going on. Your kid loves sports, grew up always playing sports, and all of a sudden one day when they're in 11th grade, they don't want to play anymore. Something else might be going on. It's important to be aware of that. Knowing your child's friends and partnering with other parents. This is huge. We had a young person stand up on the stage once and say, if my mom just would have called Johnny's mom, she would have known that Johnny was not a straight-A student. Johnny's parents did not cook dinner, and we didn't watch movies and play video games on the weekend. Johnny was actually Steve. And Steve was a drug addict, and Steve's parents were drug addicts, and we drank and did drugs on the weekend at their house. So a simple call, partnering with other parents, can be so helpful. Monitoring and guiding, you got to have guidelines to know, and they need expectations as well. They don't need a friend, right? They've got hundreds of those on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, right? But they need a parent. They need someone with a fully developed brain to look at them and say, you know what? This is what you need right now. This is where, these are the guidelines, these are the expectations. And so that's so important. At this time, I'm going to just remind you of your survey. When we're done with the Q&A, you can hand those in. It's great information for us and the rest of the information in the folder. But at this time, I'll invite Sheriff Bostrom back up to kind of close the time, and we'll move into our Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam. And so as they're getting assembled over there, one of the things that, I talked about in my opening, how does one group, one aspect of this actually solve the problem? And I was reminded of a few years ago being up at the state capitol building, and I was up there representing law enforcement. The chief judge was there. We had the commissioner from the Department of Health was there. We had members from the health community, emergency departments and so on. So as you can imagine, the typical press conference thing, right? We're all kind of lined up there like the church choir. And one of the members of the media asked a question. And the question was, all of you have spoken, but what works? And kind of like, what's the silver bullet? And what I do know is that if any one of us try to do this by ourselves, that won't work. We know that. But what will work is when we do what we're doing this evening, where we get together as a community, we listen to the facts, we digest that a little bit, we get a chance to kind of hear then those personal stories. And hopefully we start to discover that it's not something that's happening to someone else, and that until it happens to me, I really can't do anything. We all have sometimes a large part to play or a small part, but nonetheless, we do have a part to play. And so again, I appreciate you carving some time out this evening to spend some time learning a little bit more about this. And it's at this time we'll spend a little bit the rest of our time together up until about 8:30, give or take, answering some questions from you. So and we do have some mobile microphones, is that correct? Yes, we do. There it is. There's the mobile microphone. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and we can start over there.
I assume, obviously, the kids are not getting the drugs by themselves. Are the people that are kind of reaching the kids with the drugs coming from other parts of town, or these also just our normal citizens that are living up here that I'm passing at Burgers? I mean, are there people just targeting the kids and then the kids bring it into the schools? How does it sort of get here in the first place?
That's not an easy question to answer. There is a little bit of both. There are kids that will be selling the drugs. They use that to support their own habit. They'll get it from other people. It's not hard to find, so if you go looking for it, you have to know where to go, but literally it can be found anywhere. So there's no real easy answer. Otherwise, there'd be, like the sheriff talked about, the silver bullet. My team would go and we'd stop those people from dealing the drugs. But there's drugs coming into the schools through students. There's people around the schools that sell drugs. These are not good people. It's not, when you say average citizen, they're not an average citizen. They're people that are preying on individuals who have an addiction. And some of them are trying to support their own habits, while others are clearly just trying to turn a profit. There's many people from the drug cartels in Mexico, and their main goal is to get people addicted on drugs and sell as many drugs as they can, make as much money as they can. And these are the people that the VSET team and other law enforcement go after. Unfortunately, as we mentioned before, we can't arrest our way out of it. So even though we arrest some dealers, there's other dealers that will come up and take their place. So kind of goes back to what we talked about before, education, talking with your kids, trying to make sure that they don't start down the path, because once they start down the path and start using those drugs, no matter how hard law enforcement works, we're not going to be able to prevent them from getting drugs if they're looking for them. Does that answer your question?
Thanks, Ryan. And if I could, Kevin, you talked about you ran into that in high school. So where do you think some of your colleagues in high school were coming up with that stuff?
Typically older influences. But I mean, it comes from the kids too. I mean, when I was in high school, the biggest drug dealer was the captain of the hockey team. So it comes from anywhere. But it always starts with those older influences, whether it's somebody in the neighborhood, maybe a cousin, older brother. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people think it's someone that's supposed to look a certain way. But like I said, I mean, I got more drugs from the people I played sports with than anywhere else. So that's where I found it.
What do we do do we search our kids' rooms? Do we find the drugs in their stuff? Are we invading their privacy? Laura, and, you know, how did you guys, how do we help? How do you go up against them and say, you know, I love you, I care for you?
Sometimes we have to do the tough things. That's what my mom did. She would find bottles of alcohol in my closet and would dump them out and leave them on the table for conversation later. But sometimes we have to do the tough things in order to know that our kids are safe. And if you have a feeling that something might be going on, it's good to look into that feeling, absolutely.
And just point out, just say it, I found this.
Yeah. A lot of parents, too, get in the mentality that it can't be my kid. Yes, it can. It can be anybody's kid. It all depends on who the influences are. That's what my parents, they didn't think it could happen to me. And I was really good at hiding it, so they took my word for it. You know?
Right.
Do a little checking in, you know? If they tell you they did something, there's ways to find out. So I would encourage that.
That's the point of intervention too, and point of prevention is like if you just avoid it, like there isn't a chance for it to be addressed. And so that's how the longer it goes not addressed, the longer, the more time develops to actually develop an addiction to it. Like Kevin talked about, when he got to that breaking point, he was out of options. His family wouldn't talk to him. And so that's what allowed him to finally come to that point of, hey, I need help. And so sometimes those difficult things, like the legal consequences, like those types of things, can be means for intervention and moving forward.
So as long as they're in your home, you know, you can use that. You live in this home. I suspect something. I looked in your room and I found it. You know, they look at you and go, you can't search my stuff. You can't do this. But
yeah, you're the parent. You right? I mean, ask them, what bills do you pay, right? Like you pay the bills. You're in charge. They're in your home, and so it's one of those things where that's your property. You have the ability to do that. And then if they leave, they leave. I think that's kind of what Lori talked about with the difficulties. But yeah.
And I like Laura stated too, if you have reason to suspect, then it's probably happening. You know, Ryan was an adult, we searched his room, and the thing that's frustrating is, doesn't matter whether you find something or not, when we found something, it didn't make us feel better, but it allowed us to open up the conversation. This is what we found, let's sit down and talk. I want to share one thing, because I don't know if Ramsey County does it, but I learned something new at every one of these forums I attend, and in Washington County, you can actually call them, and they will come out and search your house for you. And honestly, had I known that, we spent hours and hours, multiple times. And like I said, if we found something, you know, and again, they're on your side. They're here to help you get your son or daughter the treatment that they need.
And I don't want to speak on behalf of the chiefs, but for anybody that's worked patrol here, any of the law enforcement folks, we've had calls like that where the parent, and actually, you might, I don't know if you'll find this interesting, I guess that's the word I'll use, is that it's sometimes not the parent calling, it's the kid calling the cops on the parents saying, yeah, I need you to talk to my parents and tell them they can't come into my room. And and then there's something with the logic that thinks because they called the cops, they're the ones that are right. And so then we have a few educational moments with the kid, and we're able to explain back to what Adam said. Here's how things work, is that even if you are paying rent, whose name is on the lease, whose name is on the mortgage, those are the people that determine what happens in this household. And at their invitation, you can give consent to search. You don't need a search warrant or anything else. You can do that. You can either do it on your own, or you can deputize us to do it on your behalf. But those are the kinds of things that I think somehow, maybe it's TV or one friend talking to another, but sometimes kids think that, well, wait a minute, this is my stuff. No, it's your home, it's your vehicle. Please feel empowered. That still is the case. And again, like the panelists said, please feel free to be responsible for those areas, and we're there to assist if you need us. I know there's a question,
you.
I think, next to you. Yeah.
Well, when you search the room and you find something, I mean, prevention, I mean, yeah, you sit down and talk to your child, but I would want to go a step further and say, okay, we're going somewhere. Where do I go? We need to talk. You and I, you, me, my dad, everybody's got to go, and we're going to go somewhere else where we're going to get more authority on this, because I can only talk to you. I don't know even what to say to you. We're going to go now to go get more information. So where do I go? Who do I call?
Okay, great question. Panelists?
Well, there's a lot of different resources. If you're looking at, if someone has an addiction and you're looking to like get them help to get them into treatment, you go to the county.
I'm just talking, if I go into my child's room and I do find something.
Right.
Okay, I don't want it just to be table talk just between you and I, okay, let's go to bed, tomorrow's another day.
Right.
I want to say,
Yeah.
no, we found something, we are going somewhere right this moment to figure out what is going on, because I don't know what to do. I need help. We need help.
Yeah.
And I don't want to wait till the morning to figure it out.
Right. So I think that in that time it kind of depends on what day of the week it is and what where you're at. Just because some resources are available, like county resources, you can take them for a Rule 25 assessment. You can call a treatment program to meet with someone. You can call law enforcement. That would probably be your best bet. But it really kind of depends.
And I was going to say the same thing. If in doubt and you want to have some contact or some resources and you don't know where to go, 911. Any agency here will respond. We will show up. We will help try to determine what happened. We'll try to determine what the substances were, and we're there to help you as a parent and you as a family. And we will find some resources for you. Whether it be emergency resources or try to get you some other interventions at the time. And it's not always easy at 10 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning when that occurs. But we are here. We'll show up. We'll be on your doorstep. We'll be open to working with a parent to try to find out what the best possible approach is for your son or daughter, and we'll take it seriously. And that's what we're here for. It's, we'd much rather prevent and get involved at the early stages of something occurring rather than responding when something more serious has occurred. So when in doubt, police are always here, 911.
And along those lines, I'm going to ask County Attorney Choi to comment on this in just a second. I've gone to some places when they do graduation, let's say at Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge, or if you were to go to other places where people have successfully made that passage through recovery on an extended recovery. There's an interesting story that gets told, and you've heard part of it this evening, but a lot of times they were so mad at that cop that arrested them. But they would, and what the one thing that they could admit in front of everybody some 12 months later is that even though they were saying terrible things in that squad car and on their way down to the police department, ultimately to the sheriff's office for custody, is they knew that event saved their life. Had they not been arrested, they would have died. They would have never admitted it, but they knew in their heart of hearts at that moment. And so those times where, and we hear that when we're making those arrests where people are saying just evil things to us. The issue is that, that's part of what we do, but ultimately is we want them to get help. And so in the same fashion, I think sometimes parents would be reluctant to call the cops because I don't want my kid having a record. And John, can you just kind of comment on how drug courts deal with these types of issues?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because sometimes for a lot of people who are struggling through addiction, sometimes they have to see rock bottom to really see the whole picture. And sometimes for some people, not everybody, but that contact with the criminal justice system sometimes will scare that individual to start thinking a little bit differently. But from the standpoint of, from a police officer who will deal with that person, but then as a prosecutor, if someone is coming into the system with a first-time offense, I mean, we're going to be looking to see how we can get this person not to come back in the system as long as we're talking about a very simple drug possession case. But we also, in drug court, will take chances on people who might be deemed high risk and have high needs. And we do that because we know that if we can utilize the power of the criminal justice system, because you might have prison time hanging over your head, that gives every incentive to comply with all the various rules. And then through the drug court process, you have a judge, a prosecutor, a defense attorney, and mentors and then chemical treatment, all working together really on the same team. So we kind of throw out that whole adversarial process, so we're not so much looking to send that person to prison, but sometimes that's what has to happen. But oftentimes we will look at trying to figure out ways to try to ultimately address the underlying issue to get that person not in the criminal justice system.
Other questions?
Do you have to arrest, so that if we call you and the kid has something, do you automatically have to arrest them?
Well, I think there is a concept of police discretion, but I don't know how the police would respond in that situation.
You want to take that, Chief?
I don't want to take down the whole panel here, but no, there's always officer discretion in those situations. So there's never a mandated arrest for discovery of drugs, but at the very least, they're contraband. They're illegal to possess. We're going to take custody of those. What happens from there, whether it's a criminal charge is pursued and prosecuted or not, remains to be seen. Each case is different, and the circumstances dictate that. But the officer will always use their discretion, and certainly if it's a parent that's calling and discovering this, we'll work with them and try to find the best response to that situation.
Adam, would you repeat the question for?
Yeah.
Thank you for that, and then we'll just repeat the question. And then.
So she stated her child is 10 years old. So that's the light it was coming from in regards to the influence media has and Facebook has on their getting the drugs or even the perception of it. So our world is very different than it was 10 years ago with the internet and social media, tweeting, Instagram, like a lot of, so Facebook isn't necessarily, he talked about it as a way they're trafficking it, but a lot of kids don't spend as much time on Facebook now because their parents are there. So a lot of them are on Twitter. And then Snapchat as well. This is an app where pictures disappear, things like that. And so being aware of this stuff and being familiar with how, if they have, again, this is the situation where if they're, under the age of 18, like if you're setting up social media accounts for them, like knowing the password, those types of things, so you can monitor it. There's also some other apps that allow you to have blocks on certain websites and certain things. And so I think it's really important to know what they have access to and what they're utilizing, and then also like understanding that as their brain develops, they'll be able to discern some of this stuff. But at 10 years old, at 11 years old, and at 12 years old, like some of the movies out there, some of the TV, the MTV, a lot of these reality shows where they are getting paid to party. We were actually in Washington, D.C. at a big rally, and there was an individual that used to be on the show Laguna Beach as a reality star. When he was 16, he was paid to party, and he ended up having this huge addiction, and now he's sober and he speaks out against that. But really knowing what they're watching is really important too, and sitting down and watching it with them, and if they're uncomfortable, there might be a reason for that.
Thanks.
I just want to add to that. Like, the best way I heard it put once was in regards to social media is like, your kids 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You go to like the state fair, right? Like you're not going to let them out of your sight. Like, and if they're talking to somebody you don't know, you're going to go up and wonder who that is. That should be the same for social media. Like you need to be involved in their social media. And don't like use it as an authority, but when they start doing it, be there with them. And just do it with them so it's normal for them, so it doesn't become that bad.
Sheriff, we got a question over here.
Mm-hmm.
You explained what the Rule 25 assessment consists
Oh,
of.
yeah, great question. All right.
Yeah. So this is something that you can get free from your county. If you are if you know someone that is struggling or you're struggling yourself, you go to your county and get a Rule 25 assessment. It's a series of questions that kind of determines that you have an addiction and what available options you are available for you. And so a lot of times when it comes to treatment, you think, oh, well, we can't afford treatment. Well, the Rule 25 tells you how much the county will pay as well. And so you could end up getting assistance for that treatment. And that is you can do that through your county, and you can also do that through some treatment providers can provide Rule 25 assessments as well.
Okay.
There's some information
All
about
right.
it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, right at the bottom.
All right, and I have a couple last thank yous to help make this possible. Commander Rich Clark, would you please stand up from my office? Commander Rich Clark was key organizer. Also, we couldn't have done this without the support and assistance from the Mounds View School District. Mandy Little, thank you very much. And just backing her up there is our communications director, Randy Gustafson. So thank you very much.